Any trip to King's Cross wouldn't be complete without a visit to the Canal Museum. The canals played an integral part in the industrial growth of this area of London.
Welcome to London Canal Museum. We celebrate everything to do with London's canals here.
I know a lot about the roadways in London, but I know very little about the waterways.
The waterways actually go back many centuries, and the River Lee navigation is one of the first semi-artificial waterways that has been carrying goods into London from the northeast. The Regent's Canal that we're next to here was finished in 1820. It's one of the latest canals in the UK to be built.
Were the canals rivals to the railways, or do they sort of work together?
Well, there was a bit of each, really. There was quite a lot of canal and railway interchange in London, so traffics were carried between the two, particularly coal coming down from the north and transferred to canal boats for local distribution.
What's the sort of story with the canal now? I mean, is it still used for transportation, or...?
Well, no, with some very limited exceptions. The canal is not used for commercial traffic, but the canal is used a great deal for leisure. There's also quite a large residential community living on boats in London.
Are the exhibits permanent, or are they transient? And
we have a bit of each. Most of the exhibits are permanent, but we do have a programme of temporary exhibitions here. So at least twice a year we change the temporary exhibition to give people something to come back for.
And what can you tell me about some of the artefacts that are housed within the museum?
The centrepiece here is the narrowboat Coronis. Partly a reconstruction, but it's an original hull of a typical 1930s narrowboat for long-distance carrying of goods. The reconstruction of the cabin is the thing that fascinates visitors, young and old, especially the children, really, because they go in there and they think, well, where did people live? It's a tiny space for people who lived in incredibly cramped conditions that we would consider completely unacceptable today.
Having a wander around the museum, I noticed a lot of brightly coloured artefacts. Is there a reason behind that?
I don't know if there's a reason, but it's certainly a tradition that the boats and all sorts of things that went on the boats were brightly painted. Water cans and spoons and pots and pans and things. All kinds of things were decorated with this tradition of roses and castles painting, which is carried on to this day.
And then I went upstairs to the first floor and I saw the horse.
You met the horse?
Yes.
Well, the horse has a name. We call her Henrietta.
Oh, right.
But horses were used for pulling boats on the canals, and they were also used for delivering goods. Our building was originally an ice warehouse, but it was turned into stables for ice cart horses. Internal combustion engines didn't come onto boats until 1911. So before that, the horse was the only way apart from the occasional steam tug. When the horse started getting its marching orders, it was the Bollender engine that took over, and we've got one of those very early canal boat engines on display. So horses played a really, really important role, and their upkeep and their care is a really important part of the canal story. The only floating boat that we've got here in the museum, Bantam 4. This class of tug was built for canal maintenance mainly, and it's a pusher tug. It's got two wooden buffer beams at the front and is used to couple up to a large barge, which would normally be full of spoil from maybe dredging or something like that, and then this tug would maneuver that and move it around.
Within the museum, we explore the ice trade, the use of ice cream and the selling of ice cream, and we introduce you to Carlo Gatti, who we're very thrilled, in effect, to have him as part of our history. He came over here to open a string of restaurants, but he also built his business. They imported ice from Norway by sailing ship across the North Sea. They brought it into Limehouse, came up to our landing stage here, And then they transported that ice into what we call ice wells, huge holes in the ground.
Once the ice was put into storage, was there a lot of wastage?
I have seen figures quoted between 5 and 30% losses. I think that where we are in the trade in this part of the world, it will be the 5% end. Once it was here, once it was stored in the ground, the ground would freeze.
Right, I see.
And so there would be very little in the way of losses once it was in the ice wells. Obviously it was a business, so they must have sufficient left by the time it got there for them to still be able to sell it and make a profit. Each day they would load carts to sell that ice to hospitals, hotels, restaurants. The Italians introduced ice cream to Britain, and Carlo Gatti was one of these. He obviously sold ice cream in his restaurant, but he also sold it on the streets.
It's fascinating that something we take for granted today was so important, you know, in the sort of 1800s.